What happens when a grown man calmly accepts a chair meant to humiliate him, and quietly decides that moment will cost everyone laughing at the table far more than they expect? At my 6-year-old son's birthday party, my father-in-law sent me to the kids' table and said it suited me. I thanked him, sat down, and made sure that choice followed them into places laughter couldn't protect. While you're here, don't forget to subscribe, hit the hype button, and support this channel with a like. And tell us below, have you ever faced something like this? My name is Troy Vossil. I am 41 years old. I work as a production design engineer at Harman Manufacturing, and until 3 months ago, I believed patience was its own reward. I believed that if you stayed quiet, worked hard, and let insults roll off your back, eventually people would see your worth. I believed wrong. The backyard of our rented event space looked beautiful that Saturday afternoon. Blue and white balloons tied to every fence post, a bouncy castle in the corner, tables covered in plastic superhero tablecloths. I had arrived at 7 in the morning to set everything up, carried folding tables from my truck, arranged chairs, hung streamers until my shoulders ached. Dennis wanted a superhero party. My son, 6 years old, with his mother's brown eyes and my stubborn chin, he had been talking about this party for 2 months straight. Every night at dinner, he would add another detail, more balloons, a bigger cake, all his friends from kindergarten. I made it happen. The deposit came from my account, the catering came from my account, the bouncy castle rental, the balloon artist, the superhero performer who would arrive at 2 o'clock, all from my account. Leora handled the guest list. Frank Hargrove, my father-in-law, handled the opinions. By noon, guests started arriving. Parents in casual weekend clothes, kids already bouncing with sugar-fueled energy. I stood by the gate greeting people, shaking hands, accepting compliments on the decorations. Leora floated somewhere near the food table, her blonde hair perfect, her smile practiced. Frank arrived at 12:30 in a silver Mercedes that cost more than my annual salary. He stepped out wearing pressed khakis and a polo shirt with some golf club logo. Ethan, my brother-in-law, followed from the passenger side, already smirking. "Troy," Frank said, not a greeting but an acknowledgement, like confirming the furniture was in place. "Frank, glad you could make it. Wouldn't miss my grandson's birthday." He looked around the backyard with that expression he uses when evaluating something beneath him. "Nice setup. Rental place do all this?" "I did." Psst. He walked past me toward the food. The party flowed as parties do. Kids screamed and ran. Parents clustered in small groups. The superhero performer arrived and made Dennis's face light up like Christmas morning. I watched my son from across the yard, feeling that warm pressure in my chest that fathers know. This was worth it, all of it. At 2:30, Leora announced that food was ready. The catering trays came out, sandwiches, pasta salad, fruit platters, chicken wings. Adult tables had been set up near the patio. The kids had their own table by the bouncy castle, lower to the ground, sized for small bodies. I grabbed a plate and headed toward the adult section. Frank stood at the head of the main table like he owned the property, directing traffic. "Margie, you sit here. Tom, next to her. Ethan, right side." I approached with my plate. Frank turned to look at me. "Troy." He paused, that theatrical pause he loved. "You know what? Kids' table has an open spot. That suits you better, I think." He said it loud enough for everyone to hear. 20 adults, maybe more, all watching. Some chuckled nervously. Ethan laughed outright. That braying sound I had learned to hate. I looked at Leora. She was watching the ground. The moment stretched. I could feel phones coming out. Could feel the quiet anticipation of an audience waiting to see how the son-in-law would react. Would he argue? Would he make a scene at his own son's party? I smiled. "Thanks, Frank. Appreciate you finding me a spot." I walked to the kids' table. I sat down on a chair made for a 40-pound child, my knees nearly touching my chest. Dennis looked up at me with confusion. "Daddy, why are you sitting here?" "Wanted to be close to the birthday boy," I said. Behind me, laughter rippled through the adult tables. I heard Ethan's voice. Perfect fit. More laughter. I ate my sandwich. I watched the kids eat theirs. I listened to the conversation behind me, Frank's booming voice, Leora's quiet responses, the general chatter of people who thought they had just witnessed something funny. They had witnessed something, just not what they thought. I noticed Margie's phone pointed in my direction. Tom had his out too. At least 3 others were recording or photographing. Social media evidence. Family group chat material. The amusing image of Troy Vossil, 41-year-old engineer, folded into a child's chair at his own son's birthday party. I memorized every face that laughed. I noted every phone that recorded. I finished my sandwich, helped Dennis open his juice box, and cleaned cake frosting off his cheek when the time came. When we sang Happy Birthday, I stood behind my son with my hands on his shoulders. Frank positioned himself on the other side as if he belonged there more than I did. The cake was beautiful. 3 tiers, superhero figures on top, 6 candles waiting. Dennis blew them out in one breath. Everyone cheered. I clapped along with them. I smiled for the photos. I thanked guests as they left. I carried trash bags to the dumpster, folded tables back into my truck, and swept the rental space floor until it was cleaner than we found it. At 9 o'clock that night, the house was quiet. Dennis slept in his bed, exhausted and happy. Leora had gone to shower. I sat alone in the kitchen, a glass of water in front of me, staring at the wall. Frank's voice echoed in my head. That suits you better. The laughter, the phones. Leora's silence. Something had shifted. I could feel it in my chest. Not rage, but something colder. Clearer. A kind of resolution I had never felt before. I opened my phone and scrolled to the family group chat. The video was already there, posted by Ethan with 3 laughing emojis. Me, folded into that tiny chair, eating a sandwich. Frank's voice in the background. Natural habitat. 47 reactions. All laughing faces. I set the phone down gently. I finished my water. I went to bed beside my wife, who had not asked me how I felt about what happened. She was already asleep, or pretending to be. In the darkness, I made a decision. Not an angry decision, a practical one. If this was how things were going to be, then things were going to change. And they would change on my terms, in my time, in ways they could not laugh their way out of. I closed my eyes. For the first time in years, I felt something like peace. The first time I met Frank Hargrove, he shook my hand like he was testing my grip strength. I was 26, Leora was 23, and we had been dating for 8 months. She wanted me to meet her father. He's traditional, she said in the car on the way to his house. Just be yourself, but respectful. I was respectful. I wore a tie. The only good one I owned, navy blue with small diagonal stripes. I brought a bottle of wine I could barely afford, something the clerk at the liquor store had recommended for impressing someone important. I called him Sir until he told me to stop, which took 2 hours. Frank ran a successful logistics consulting business. He employed 40 people, drove expensive cars, and lived in a house with 6 bathrooms. The house itself was a monument to success. Columned entrance, circular driveway, landscaping that probably cost more than my annual rent. He had opinions about everything and shared them freely. Politics, sports, business, the proper way to grill a steak, the proper way a young man should approach his daughter's father. That first dinner, he asked me about my job. I explained that I was finishing my engineering degree while working part-time at a manufacturing plant. I was proud of that, working my way through school, no debt, building something real. He nodded in a way that suggested mild disappointment. Manufacturing, he said, cutting his steak with surgical precision. Hands-on work. Honest, I suppose. I did not know then that this was the beginning of a pattern. Every accomplishment would be minimized. Every success would be framed as luck or circumstance. Every failure would be remembered and repeated at family gatherings for years to come. When Leora and I got engaged, Frank took me aside at the celebration dinner. The restaurant was one of those places with white tablecloths and menus without prices. His choice, of course. We stood near the bar while Leora showed her ring to her mother. "You understand what you're getting into," he said, swirling whiskey in a crystal glass. "Leora's used to a certain lifestyle. Can you provide that? I will work hard to give her everything she needs." Working hard isn't the same as succeeding. He looked at me over the rim of his glass. Plenty of men work hard. Fewer men build something. I built something. Can you? I married Leora anyway. I loved her. I believed love was enough. The first few years were good. We rented a small apartment on the 3rd floor of an old building. Creaky stairs, radiator heat, a kitchen barely big enough for 2 people to stand in at once. I finished my degree and moved into a full-time engineering position at Harman Manufacturing. Leora worked in marketing for a local firm. We saved money, built a life, supported each other. I remember those years with a warmth that surprises me now. Late nights studying together at our tiny kitchen table. Weekend mornings when we would walk to the bakery on the corner and split a single pastry because that was what we could afford. The way she would fall asleep on my shoulder while I watched television, and I would sit perfectly still for hours rather than wake her. Frank was present but manageable during those years. He made comments, sure. Nice apartment, cozy, meant it was small. That's an interesting career choice, meant he thought I should aim higher. You've been at that company how long now? implied I should have moved on already. But the comments came with smiles, could be interpreted as teasing, could be deflected with a laugh and a change of subject. Ethan was worse from the beginning. Leora's older brother had inherited his father's arrogance without the accomplishment to justify it. He worked in Frank's company, held a title he had not earned, and treated everyone outside the family business as fundamentally inferior. At family dinners, he would ask about my salary in ways designed to humiliate. He would compare my car to his car, my watch to his watch, my career trajectory to his planned inheritance. Leora always said the same thing. That's just how they are. Don't let it bother you. When did it change? When did manageable become unbearable? I have spent nights trying to identify the exact moment. Maybe when Dennis was born. That moment in the hospital, holding my son for the first time, changed something fundamental in me. I understood suddenly what I was building, what I was protecting, and I understood, with growing clarity, that Frank saw my son as an extension of his legacy, not as my child, but as his grandson, someone to be shaped, influenced, claimed. Frank became more involved after Dennis arrived, more present, more opinionated. He had thoughts about child-rearing, about our financial choices, about the neighborhood we chose for our first house. He showed up unannounced with gifts that were always slightly too expensive, designed to remind us what we could not afford ourselves. This area's fine for starting out, he said at the housewarming, surveying our modest 3-bedroom like it was a temporary inconvenience. But you'll want to move up eventually, for the boys' sake. Move up. Always moving up. Never good enough where I was, never successful enough, never wealthy enough, never enough like him. Or maybe the change was gradual, so slow I did not see it happening. A joke here, a comment there, each one slightly sharper than the last, like a knife being sharpened one stroke at a time, individually harmless, cumulatively cutting, and Leora, each time saying the same thing. That's just how he is. Let it go. I let things go. I let them go until there was nothing left to hold. The late-night kitchen had become my processing space. After the birthday party, I sat there again and again, replaying memories like old films. The fluorescent light hummed overhead. The refrigerator clicked and whirred. Outside, the neighborhood slept while I cataloged humiliations. Frank announcing at Thanksgiving that I finally got a promotion, with emphasis that suggested surprise, as if my success was an anomaly that defied explanation. The way the table laughed, and Leora smiled without meeting my eyes. Ethan asking loudly at a restaurant whether I could afford to split the check, then offering to cover me in front of a dozen family members. His mock generosity worse than outright insult. Leora sighing when I expressed frustration, as if my feelings were an inconvenience to be managed rather than concerns to be addressed. "You're too sensitive," she would say. "They don't mean anything by it." I remembered a barbecue 3 years ago. The 4th of July, Frank's enormous backyard filled with guests. He was holding court by the grill, a professional-grade setup that cost more than my first car, telling a story about some business deal he had closed. I was standing nearby, holding a beer I had not asked for, listening because there was nowhere else to stand. "The key," Frank said to his audience of admirers, "is knowing who matters at the table, who makes decisions, who moves things forward." He paused, that theatrical pause he loved. "And who just fills a seat." He had looked directly at me when he said that last part. Several people noticed. Someone laughed nervously. Leora had been inside, helping with dishes, oblivious. I smiled and sipped my beer and pretended I had not understood. I remembered Christmas 2 years ago. Gifts were being exchanged in Frank's cavernous living room, the tree professionally decorated, wrapped packages arranged like a magazine photo shoot. He handed me a wrapped box with exaggerated ceremony. Open it," he said, playing to the crowd. Inside was a book. "Career Success for the Overlooked Professional." "Thought you could use some tips," he said. The room laughed. Even Leora shook her head slightly. But she was embarrassed by the joke, I realized later, not embarrassed for me. These memories lived in my garage now, the garage where I kept my workbench, my old notebooks, the detritus of years of engineering work. After that birthday party sat in my bones like a cold stone, I started spending more time out there. The space was mine, cluttered with tools and projects, smelling of sawdust and machine oil. No one bothered me there. I found old sketches from my first years at Harman Manufacturing, design concepts I had developed for production line improvements, notes in my handwriting, dated and initialed, predating several patents the company now held. I found binders full of project documentation I had taken home to work on over weekends, before digital systems made that unnecessary. Drafts and revisions with my notes in the margins. Ideas that had become products. Solutions that had become profit. I had never thought much about these documents. They were just work. Evidence of effort, nothing more. But sitting in that garage at midnight, I started thinking differently. One evening, I walked inside to get more coffee. Dennis was in the living room with Leora, watching cartoons. The television cast blue shadows across their faces. As I passed, I heard my son's voice. Daddy sits at the kids' table because Grandpa says that's where daddies go. I stopped, turned slowly. Dennis was not looking at me. He was watching the TV, repeating something he had heard as casually as a weather report. Just information. Just something he had learned. Leora noticed me standing there. Our eyes met. Something passed between us. Not understanding, but its absence. Kids repeat things, she said. You know that. I went back to the garage. I did not trust myself to respond. The next family gathering was 3 weeks later at the community sports hall. Some local youth league that Ethan's company had sponsored, a tax write-off dressed up as community involvement. There was a reception. Attendance was expected. I went. I shook hands. I made small talk with people I barely knew and would never see again. The hall smelled like floor polish and gymnasium, with folding tables covered in cheap tablecloths. Frank circulated like a politician, slapping backs, laughing loudly, holding court wherever he stopped. At some point, he noticed me standing near the refreshment table. I was holding a plastic cup of lemonade, watching the crowd, waiting for the evening to end. Troy, there he is. He approached with 3 other men in tow, executives from Ethan's firm, men in expensive suits, with expensive watches, wearing expensive confidence. Gentlemen, this is my son-in-law, manufacturing engineer. Comes to these things, doesn't say much, kind of like furniture. The men laughed politely. Frank laughed louder. I'm kidding, of course. Troy's a good guy, solid. Just replaceable, you know? That's manufacturing. Anyone can do it. He clapped me on the shoulder and moved on. The executives followed, already forgetting my face. I stood there holding my plastic cup, feeling my face carefully arranged into neutral. The word echoed in my head. Replaceable. The word followed me home. It sat beside me in the car, occupying the passenger seat like a physical presence. It walked with me into the house. It stood over me while I lay awake at 3 a.m, staring at the ceiling, feeling Leora's steady breathing beside me. Replaceable. I was not replaceable. I knew that. My work at Harmon, the designs, the solutions, the efficiency improvements, these were not interchangeable. These were mine. The company depended on what I had created. But Frank did not know that. No one did. Because I had never said anything. I had let the credit go elsewhere, let the recognition flow to louder voices, let myself become invisible. That would change. We would see about replaceable. Harmon Manufacturing occupied a sprawling complex on the industrial edge of the city. 3 main buildings, 17 production lines, 400 employees. The complex had grown over decades, building added to building, creating a maze of corridors and workspaces that newcomers took months to navigate. From the highway, it looked like a small city unto itself. Smokestacks rising against gray sky, parking lots stretching in every direction, trucks lined up at loading docks around the clock. I had worked there for 15 years, starting as a junior engineer fresh out of college and climbing slowly, too slowly, according to Frank, to my current position as production design lead. The job was technical, detailed, and invisible to most people. I designed improvements to manufacturing processes. I solved problems that others could not identify. I turned inefficiencies into efficiencies, saved the company money they never thanked me for, and watched other people take credit for my work. That was the pattern. That was how things worked here. Engineers created, management presented, executives took bows. The cycle repeated year after year, project after project, and no one ever questioned it because questioning would mean admitting the system was broken. Monday morning, after the sports hall humiliation, I walked through the plant floor with different eyes. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting that familiar industrial glow across polished concrete. Some of the fixtures flickered. Maintenance requests I had submitted months ago, still ignored. The smell of machine oil and metal shavings filled my lungs, a smell I had breathed for 15 years without really noticing it. Now every detail seemed sharper, more significant. The hum of machinery formed a constant backdrop, punctuated by the rhythm of conveyor belts and the pneumatic hiss of automated systems. The distant shouts of floor supervisors coordinating shifts echoed through the vast space. Workers in safety vests moved between stations, their movements practiced and efficient. Most of them had been here for years, some for decades. They knew the machines better than the engineers who designed them. And like me, most of them went unrecognized. I noticed things I had stopped seeing years ago. The safety posters on the walls, yellowed with age, featuring models wearing outdated equipment. The worn paths in the concrete where workers walk the same routes day after day, their footsteps literally carving history into the floor. The windows high up near the ceiling, clouded with years of industrial grime, letting in weak gray light that made everything look slightly washed out. The coffee machine in the break area, ancient and temperamental, that somehow still produced drinkable coffee despite constant threats of replacement. Production Line 7 was running a new configuration I had designed 18 months ago. The specs were mine, drawn on my home computer during weekends I could have spent with my family. I remembered those weekends with painful clarity. Dennis asking me to play catch in the backyard, Leora sighing when I said, "Just one more hour," the quiet guilt that never quite went away when I finally closed my laptop at midnight. All for work that carried someone else's name. The patent application listed my name, buried in the fine print below 3 executives who had contributed nothing but signatures. I had seen the document when it was filed, noted the arrangement without comment. That was what you did. You accepted the hierarchy. You understood your place. I stood watching the machines work, watching my ideas generate profit for people who did not know my name. The mechanical arms moved with precision I had calculated, reaching and rotating with tolerances I had specified. Each movement represented hours of my time, calculations done and redone until they were perfect. The solutions I had created hummed along without fanfare, without acknowledgement, without anyone stopping to wonder who had made it all possible. A foreman named Bill walked past and nodded. He was an older man, close to retirement, with decades of floor experience written into his weathered face. His hands were rough from years of manual work, his posture slightly stooped from bending over machinery. Bill had been at Harmon longer than almost anyone, and he remembered things that management preferred to forget. "Looking good, Troy. Your redesign really fixed those jam issues we were having. Used to shut down twice a shift. Now we're running clean for weeks at a time." "Thanks, Bill." Management came through last week bragging about efficiency numbers. Had a whole delegation from corporate showing them around like they'd built the place themselves. He shook his head, his expression a mixture of disgust and resignation. "Didn't mention you once. Not a single word. Just kept talking about innovative leadership and strategic vision. Makes you wonder who they think actually does the work around here." "Same as always." "Yeah, same as always." He paused, studying my face with those experienced eyes. "You okay? You seem different today. More awake, maybe." "Just thinking." "Careful with that. Thinking leads to questions. Questions lead to answers people don't want to hear." He moved on before I could respond, heading toward line 8 where some issue required his attention. No one else stopped. No one else acknowledged that the smooth operation they all depended on existed because I had spent 6 weekends solving a problem management had called impossible. That was the word they used in the project meeting 18 months ago, impossible. The jamming issue had plagued Line 7 for 2 years before I was assigned to it. Previous engineers had declared it a hardware limitation, a fundamental design flaw that could not be fixed without replacing the entire system at a cost of $4 million. I fixed it in 3 weeks with a software modification and a redesigned feed mechanism. I worked through the problem systematically, testing theories at home on my own computer, building small-scale models in my garage, running simulations until 2 in the morning. Total cost of my solution, $12,000. Annual savings, approximately $2 million. Recognition, 0. When I presented my solution to management, they nodded, said, "Good work," and immediately began discussing how to present the news to the board. My name never made it into that presentation. The efficiency improvement was attributed to cross-functional collaboration and leadership initiative. I passed the design office and nodded to my colleagues. Mike Renner, who had once presented my efficiency report to the board as if he had written it. I remembered that meeting with crystalline clarity, sitting in the back row, watching Mike gesture at slides I had created, hearing him say, "My analysis shows," and "I recommend," without once acknowledging my name. He had even fielded questions about methodology, making up answers on the spot because he had no idea how the actual work had been done. Stephanie Glass, who routinely assigned me grunt work while claiming strategic projects for herself. She was talented at one thing, identifying valuable work and attaching her name to it. She had an instinct for which projects would get visibility, which innovations would catch executive attention, and she had no hesitation about stepping over colleagues to position herself at the front. They were drinking coffee, laughing about something, some corporate gossip, some complaint about management that would never amount to action. They barely registered my presence as I walked past. Normal faces, normal morning, nothing visibly wrong. Except I was seeing the pattern now, the same pattern from home, recreated at work. I was useful but invisible, productive but uncredited, essential but That word again, replaceable. I sat at my desk and opened my computer. The chair creaked beneath me. The same cheap office chair I had been using for 8 years, while management bought themselves Herman Miller ergonomic seating and standing desks with motorized adjustments. My desk was cluttered with project folders, technical manuals, handwritten notes that no one else would understand. A small photo of Dennis sat in the corner, partially hidden by stacked papers. Years of emails waited in my inbox. Hundreds of threads, thousands of messages, a documentary record of work done and credit taken. I started scrolling backward, looking for something specific, something I vaguely remembered from years ago, a policy discussion that had seemed unimportant at the time. Found it. A message from 3 years ago, from Martin Cole in legal. Martin handled contracts and intellectual property for the company. His email confirmed what I vaguely remembered. Certain engineering designs developed using personal resources retained partial ownership rights to the creator, subject to company review. Subject to review. Not automatically transferred, not automatically owned. I read the email 3 times, then I read the attached policy document. The language was dense, legal, carefully worded, full of clauses and subclauses and references to other documents. But the meaning was clear beneath all the corporate language. Work created on my own time, with my own equipment, or retained certain protections unless I explicitly signed them away. I had never signed anything. No one had ever asked. The company had simply assumed ownership, the way they assumed so many things about people like me. I printed the email. I printed several others, related messages, policy updates, contract references. I started building a folder. That afternoon, I attended a project meeting in Conference Room B. 6 people around a long table, discussing the rollout of a new automated testing system. The room smelled like stale coffee and dry erase markers. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, one of them flickering occasionally in a rhythm that made concentration difficult. A whiteboard covered one wall, still showing notes from a previous meeting no one had bothered to erase. Someone else's ideas, someone else's project, abandoned mid-discussion. I had designed the core mechanics of the testing system. I had solved the calibration problems that had stalled development for months. When other engineers declared the project behind schedule and over budget, I found a solution that brought it back on track in 2 weeks. The project manager, a man named Brendan Hale, was presenting my work as his own. The testing integration, my concept here, reduces cycle time by 18%, Brendan said, pointing to slides I had created. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my monthly car payment, gesturing confidently at diagrams I had drawn at 3 a.m. while the rest of my house slept. The key innovation, he continued, was recognizing that traditional calibration methods were fundamentally flawed. I developed a new approach that dynamically adjusts parameters based on real-time feedback. This required rethinking the entire architecture of the testing process. I developed my concept, my approach. The other attendees nodded along, impressed by his confidence, by his polished delivery. They asked questions, and Brendan answered them with the smooth assurance of someone who had practiced in front of a mirror. I sat quietly in the back. I took notes. I did not correct him. Years of conditioning had taught me that corrections were pointless, that speaking up would be seen as unprofessional, as sour grapes, as the complaints of someone who could not play the corporate game. That the path to success was keeping your head down and doing good work. Eventually, I had always believed the cream would rise. Eventually, quality would be recognized. I had been believing that for 15 years. I was done believing, but I did notice that his slides contained my original file metadata. The footer said, created by T. Vossil, a detail he had apparently forgotten to remove when he copied my files into his presentation folder. And I noticed that the project documentation referenced my early drafts by name, drafts he had apparently forgotten to scrub from the shared system. After the meeting, I lingered in the hallway until everyone had left. Brendan walked past me without a word, already on his phone, already moving to the next performance. The others filtered away to their offices and their desks and their own small worlds of work and credit. When the hallway was empty, I returned to my office and accessed the shared drive. The building had that empty feeling that comes after hours, when footsteps echo and lights seem dimmer and the normal buzz of activity fades to something quieter. I found the original project folder. The file history was thorough. The system tracked every change, every access, every modification. It showed 23 revisions, the first 12 created by T. Vossil before Brendan Hale ever touched the project. Each revision time-stamped, each change logged, a clear documentary trail showing exactly who had done the work and when. I saved screenshots. I downloaded backup copies to my personal drive. I continued building my folder. The next morning, I arrived early. 5:30, before the shift change, before the parking lot filled, before the building came alive with the usual chaos of production. The plant was quiet, just the hum of machinery on standby and the distant sound of the cleaning crew finishing their shift. Security waved me through without comment. They knew my face, knew my habits. I had been arriving early for years, a reliable presence in an unreliable world. I walked through the design office, past rows of empty desks still covered with the debris of yesterday's work. Coffee cups, scattered papers, family photos and motivational posters, and the accumulated clutter of careers in progress. The records room was in the back, behind a keycard access door that most employees never used. Why would they? The records were old, physical, largely forgotten in an age of digital storage. Everything important had been scanned and uploaded years ago, or so people assumed, but the originals remained, gathering dust, holding secrets that the digital copies might not preserve. The records room was climate-controlled, maintained at precisely 65 degrees to protect the aging paper. The hum of the HVAC system filled the small space. Old project files lined the walls in neat archival boxes, organized by year and department. Dust motes floated in the air, disturbed by my entrance. The smell was distinctive, old paper and cardboard and the faint chemical trace of preservation treatments. I found the box labeled Production Line 4, Development, and opened it carefully. The cardboard was brittle with age, the label handwritten in ink that had faded to brown. Inside were the original design proposals. Meeting notes in various handwriting, engineers long retired, managers long promoted, voices preserved in ink and paper, technical specifications with revision marks, and there, halfway down the stack, my handwritten notes on the automated insertion mechanism. Notes dated 6 years ago, though 2 years before any official patent filing. I recognized my own handwriting immediately. The careful diagrams, drawn with the precision of someone who thought visually. The calculations in the margins, showing my work like a student preparing for an exam. The problem-solving process documented step by step, the false starts, the corrections, the breakthrough moment when the solution finally clicked into place. This was how I worked, methodically, thoroughly, leaving a trail of evidence without realizing it. 6 years ago, I had no idea these notes would matter. I was just solving a problem, documenting my process, doing my job. The mechanism was worth millions. The patent was held by Harman Manufacturing, but my original designs predated their documentation by 2 full years. My ideas came first. My solutions made their patents possible. I photographed every page with my phone. I cross-referenced dates with company records I accessed later that day. There were gaps in the chain of ownership, places where my early work had been absorbed without proper transfer documentation, missing signatures, absent acknowledgments, a trail of assumptions that had never been formalized. This was not an accident, I realized. This was standard practice. Engineers created, management claimed. The system depended on people like me never looking closely. I was looking now, and I was seeing everything clearly for the first time in 15 years. That evening at home, Leora asked me how my day was. "Fine," I said. "Normal." She nodded, already looking at her phone, scrolling through something that held her attention more than I did. "Dad wants to do dinner next Sunday, the whole family." "Sure." She looked up briefly. "You okay? You seem distant lately." "Just tired. Work stuff." She accepted this without further questions. That was how our conversations went now. Surface level, functional, avoiding anything that might require real engagement. I went to the garage. I kept building. Thursday brought an interesting discovery. While organizing old notebook pages, notebooks I had kept for years, filled with ideas and sketches and solutions that had never found their way into official company records, I found additional sketches for the automated insertion mechanism, more evidence, more documentation. The dates were clear, written in my habitual format, month, day, year, with my initials in the corner. No ambiguity, no room for interpretation. These ideas were mine before they were anyone else's. The evidence was incontrovertible to anyone willing to look. I photographed every page. I organized everything by date and project. The folder grew thicker. Friday afternoon, I made a phone call from my car in the plant parking lot. The windows were fogged with my breath. Rain drummed on the roof, a steady rhythm that matched my heartbeat. Other cars came and went around me, workers leaving for the weekend, thinking about anything but work. A normal Friday, a normal departure. Nothing about what I was doing was normal. Cole & Associates, how may I direct your call? Martin Cole, please. Tell him it's Troy Vossil from Harman Manufacturing. A pause. 1 moment. Hold music played. Something classical, forgettable. I watched the rain streak down my windshield, distorting the view of the building where I had given 15 years. Martin came on the line. His voice was professional, neutral. Troy, it's been a while. What can I do for you? I need to schedule a meeting, off-site, at your convenience. His voice shifted slightly, becoming more careful. Attorneys recognize certain tones. What's this regarding? Documentation review. Ownership clauses. Some things I'd like to get clarity on. A longer pause. I could almost hear him thinking, processing, understanding. I can meet Monday, Café Luciana at noon. I'll be there. I hung up. I looked at the folder on my passenger seat, now thick with printouts and photographs. I looked at the rain streaming down my windshield, distorting the view of the building where I had given 15 years of my life for minimal recognition. The pieces were coming together. Not angry pieces. Practical ones. The kind of pieces that build something solid, something that cannot be dismissed or laughed away. Café Luciana was a quiet place. Old brick and wooden booths, the kind of establishment where business was discussed in low voices and deals were made over espresso. The building had stood on this corner for 40 years, surviving urban renewal projects and chain restaurant invasions through sheer stubbornness. Faded photographs of Italy lined the walls, black and white images of coastal villages and family gatherings from decades past, fishing boats and vineyard workers and children playing in narrow streets. The coffee was excellent, strong and dark, served in ceramic cups that had seen decades of use. Each cup was slightly different, worn in unique ways by thousands of hands. The smell of fresh espresso and baked bread filled the air, mixing with something older, something that spoke of conversations that mattered. This was not a place for casual meetings. People came here to talk seriously, away from offices and prying ears. I arrived 10 minutes early and chose a booth in the back corner, facing the door. An old habit from nowhere in particular, I just liked seeing who came and went. The leather seat creaked as I settled in, worn smooth by years of customers, molded to accommodate bodies of all shapes. The table was wooden, scarred by decades of coffee cups and elbows and documents spread for discussion. The lunch crowd was sparse, mostly retirees reading newspapers and work-from-home types tapping on laptops. A young couple shared a pastry by the window, oblivious to everything but each other. They reminded me of Leora and me years ago, before Frank's influence had calcified everything between us. Before conversations became negotiations and silences became accusations, I ordered coffee and waited. The folder sat on the table in front of me, thick with documents I had organized and reorganized a dozen times. Every page had a purpose. Every piece of evidence connected to another. I had built this case the way I built engineering solutions, methodically, precisely, leaving nothing to chance. Each section was tabbed and labeled. Each document was dated and annotated. If Martin Cole had questions, I had answers. The coffee arrived, strong, dark, served in a cup with a small chip on the rim. I wrapped my hands around its warmth and watched the door. Martin Cole arrived exactly at noon. Not 12:01, not 11:59, exactly noon with the precision of someone who valued time and expected others to do the same. He was a tall man with gray at his temples and the kind of calm face that revealed nothing. 47 years old, according to his firm's website. 22 years of practice in contracts and intellectual property. The kind of attorney who spoke quietly because he did not need to raise his voice. His suit was well-tailored but not flashy, navy blue, conservative cut, the uniform of someone who let his work speak louder than his appearance. His shoes were polished but not ostentatious. Everything about him suggested competence without pretension. We shook hands. His grip was firm but not aggressive, professional, measured, the handshake of someone who had shaken thousands of hands and learned to read people through that simple contact. He sat down across from me, ordered coffee without looking at the menu, and folded his hands on the table. "This is unusual," he said, settling into the booth. His eyes were sharp, already assessing the folder in front of me, already calculating possibilities. "You've never reached out before." "Never had reason to." He studied me. I let him. I had nothing to hide and nothing to prove. Not yet. The waitress brought his coffee, and he thanked her with a brief nod, his attention remaining on me. "And now you do." I opened the folder I had brought. I had organized it carefully. Original documents first, then supporting evidence, then correspondence, then legal references. Color-coded tabs marked each section, red for ownership documents, blue for timelines, yellow for correspondence, green for policy references. I started laying out documents, spreading them across the table like cards in a game I intended to win. "Let me show you what I've found," I said. Original design sketches with dates clearly visible, my handwriting unmistakable. Email chains showing project timelines with timestamps and sender information highlighted. File metadata printed with creation dates and modification histories. Patent applications and the dates they were filed with the relevant sections underlined. Project timelines showing my contributions months before official records began. Martin reviewed each item silently. His expression remained neutral, but I could see his eyes moving quickly, making connections that I had made over weeks compressed into minutes of review. He turned pages carefully, handling the documents like evidence, which I supposed they were. His coffee sat untouched, growing cold beside him. "These are significant," he said finally, looking up. His neutral expression had shifted slightly, not surprise exactly, but increased attention. "I know. If what you're suggesting is accurate, if these ownership chains are as incomplete as they appear, there could be substantial implications. Not just for you, but for the company. Their entire patent portfolio could be called into question. The liability exposure alone? I'm not suggesting, I'm documenting. Everything in this folder is verifiable. Timestamps, file histories, original documents still in company archives. I'm not making claims, I'm presenting facts." He set down the papers and looked at me directly. Something shifted in his expression. Respect, perhaps, or professional interest. The look of someone recognizing quality work. "Troy, I handled several of these patent filings myself. I reviewed the transfers. I signed off on documentation that I now realize may have been incomplete." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "What you're showing me raises questions I should have asked at the time, questions I failed to ask." "Will you ask them now?" He was quiet for a moment. The cafe's ancient espresso machine hissed in the background, building pressure for someone's latte. Somewhere, a spoon clinked against a saucer. Outside, a delivery truck rumbled past, shaking the windows slightly. The world continued around us while something important took shape at our small table. A waiter passed with a tray of sandwiches. The young couple by the window laughed at something private. Normal life proceeding normally, unaware of the conversation happening in the back booth. Then Martin nodded. "I think I need to. Professionally and ethically, if there were irregularities, they need to be addressed. I have obligations to the company, yes, but I also have obligations to the truth. And to you, as someone whose rights may have been violated. I appreciate that. I should also tell you, if what you're showing me is accurate, my position becomes complicated. I may need to recommend that you seek independent counsel, someone without ties to Harmon. I understand, but right now, I need someone who knows the company's documentation, someone who can verify what I've found." He considered this. "That's fair. Let's continue." "I'm not looking to create trouble," I said. "I'm not looking to burn anything down or destroy anyone's career. I'm looking to establish facts. What's mine, what isn't. What rights I may have retained under my employment contract." A reasonable goal. He gathered the documents carefully, stacking them in the same order I had presented them. His movements were precise, deliberate, the handling of someone who understood that documents had power. "Mind if I make copies? I'll need to compare these against company records." "I brought copies for you. The originals stay with me." He smiled slightly, the first real expression I had seen from him, a crack in the professional facade. "Smart. You've thought this through." "I've had nothing but time to think. 15 years of time." We spent another hour going through details. The lunch crowd came and went around us. Business people with quick meals, students with laptops, elderly regulars who knew the staff by name. We barely noticed. The table between us disappeared under papers and photographs and printed emails. Martin explained the legal frameworks, what constituted retained ownership, what triggered transfer clauses, what documentation was required for the company to fully claim intellectual property rights. He drew diagrams on napkins, walked me through case precedents, answered every question I asked with patience and precision. "The key issue," he said, sketching a timeline on a paper napkin, "is the gap between your original work and the formal patent filings. You created these designs on personal time using personal equipment. The company absorbed them into their portfolio without executing proper transfer agreements. Is that legal? It's a gray area, and many companies operate this way, assuming employees won't push back. They rely on the power imbalance. The employee needs the job, so they don't question things. They rely on ignorance. Most employees don't understand their rights. And they rely on inertia. By the time anyone notices, years have passed and the documentation is buried." He tapped the napkin. "But when someone does push back, when someone does understand, when someone keeps their own records, the documentation matters. And you have documentation. What happens next? I'll need to review company records, compare them to what you've shown me. Look for the gaps, the missing signatures, the assumptions that were never formalized. If everything checks out, and I believe it will, we'll have a clear picture of your legal position." He paused, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Based on what you've shown me," he said finally, closing the folder, There are at least 3 designs where your ownership rights are unclear at best. Possibly more. I'll need to verify against company records, but the gaps you've identified appear genuine. 3 designs that are currently generating revenue for Harmon. Significant revenue. Line 4 alone accounts for approximately 30% of the company's manufacturing output. It's the jewel of their production capabilities. The efficiency gains from your testing system have been documented in shareholder reports, investor presentations, annual filings. Your work is everywhere, unnamed but essential. Without it, their numbers would look very different. I know what Lean 4 generates. He looked at me with new respect. You've thought this through. I've had time to think. That evening, I rented a storage unit on the edge of town. Nothing fancy, a 10 by 10 space with a rolling door and a heavy lock. The facility was 24-hour access, security cameras at every corner visible under bright floodlights, climate control for sensitive materials. The manager, a heavy-set man with a veteran's tattoo on his forearm and the watchful eyes of someone who minded his own business, processed my paperwork without questions. "First month's free with the annual contract," he said, sliding forms across the counter. "You need boxes? Moving supplies?" "I have my own." He nodded. People came here for privacy. He understood that. I moved boxes there in the rain, notebooks, binders, hard drives with backup copies, prototypes I had built in my garage over the years. Each item cataloged, each box labeled with dates and contents, each piece of evidence protected. The rain soaked through my jacket, but I barely noticed. This work mattered too much for discomfort. Trip after trip from my car to the storage unit. Loading, arranging, checking, making sure everything was organized, accessible, secure, everything documented, everything organized, everything out of reach of anyone who might want to make it disappear. When I finished, I stood in the doorway of the unit, looking at what I had built. Boxes stacked neatly against the walls, hard drives sealed in protective cases, notebooks arranged by date, spanning 15 years of work. This was my insurance policy, my leverage, my proof that I was never replaceable. 15 years of work, preserved and protected, 15 years of ideas that other people had claimed, all of it documented, all of it mine. The following week brought a family dinner at Frank's house. I attended with Leora and Dennis, playing my role. The house was enormous, 6,000 square feet of carefully curated taste, every room designed to impress visitors and intimidate guests. Crystal chandeliers caught the light from every angle. Imported marble floors clicked under expensive shoes. Artwork that probably cost more than my annual salary hung in the hallway like casual decoration, because to Frank, a $50,000 painting was casual. The foyer alone was larger than our entire living room. Frank held court as usual, stationed by the imported marble fireplace, bourbon in hand. His voice carried through the room, commanding attention without asking for it. People orbited around him, family members, friends, business associates who happened to be invited, everyone competing for his approval, everyone laughing at his jokes, whether they were funny or not. Ethan made snide comments about my car, my clothes, my career prospects. "Still driving that thing? You know they make new cars now, right? I could give you a deal. Family discount, though I'm not sure you could afford even that." Leora floated between conversations, never landing anywhere long enough to defend me, never landing anywhere long enough to notice that defense might be needed. She had perfected the art of pleasant detachment. Dennis played with his cousins in the other room, oblivious to adult tensions. I could hear his laughter occasionally, genuine and innocent, the sound of a child who did not yet understand that some games were not games at all. That sound anchored me, reminded me what I was protecting. At one point, Frank cornered me near the bar. The bar itself was more expensive than my first car. Mahogany and brass, stocked with bottles I could not pronounce, labels in languages I did not speak. He poured himself another bourbon without offering me one. "Troy, I've been thinking. You've been at that plant how long now?" 15 years. 15 years, same company, no major moves. He shook his head slowly, swirling his drink. The ice clinked against the crystal, a sound of casual wealth. "When I was your age, I'd already started my second company. Risk-taker. That's what separates the men at the real table from the men who just fill seats." "Everyone finds their own path," I said. "Some paths just circle around, though, don't they? Some paths don't go anywhere at all. Some men are just—" He waved his hand vaguely. "Content to stay where they are. Nothing wrong with that, I suppose. Someone has to do the work." He walked away, laughing at his own observation. I watched him go. I thought about the documents in that storage unit, the evidence of everything I had built while he was making jokes. Evidence that would soon speak for itself, louder than any of his pronouncements. I finished my drink without expression. 2 days later, Martin called me. I've completed my preliminary review. And? You have grounds, serious grounds. At minimum, 3 patents were filed without proper transfer documentation. Your original designs predate company claims in ways that create significant legal exposure for Harman. We're talking about potential liability in the millions, possibly more, depending on how aggressively they want to fight. What does that mean practically? It means if you wanted to, you could challenge those patents. You could seek compensation for past use. You could potentially force the company to negotiate a settlement, or... He paused. Or you could use this leverage for something else entirely. Such as? Recognition, acknowledgement. A change in how they treat you. That's harder to quantify, but sometimes it matters more than money. Some people want the world to know what they built. That has value too. I was quiet for a moment. I thought about Frank at the birthday party, the kids' table, the laughter, the phones recording. I thought about Brendan Hale presenting my work as his own, about 15 years of invisibility, about Dennis repeating words he had heard. Daddy sits at the kids' table because Grandpa says that's where daddies go. I want acknowledgement, I said. I want what's mine, and I want certain people to understand that underestimating me was a mistake. Martin was quiet. Then, I can help with the first 2. The third, that's personal. Yes, it is. We scheduled a formal meeting at his office. More documents, more review, more planning. Meanwhile, I received an email at work, a calendar invite, a presentation to the executive board in 2 weeks. The topic, production line improvements, recognition, and next steps. I recognized the format. These presentations happened annually. Management congratulated themselves for improvements made by people like me. Awards were given to people who had not earned them. Handshakes and photographs and press releases, all featuring the wrong names. I had attended 3 such meetings in the past, sitting in the back, unnamed and unacknowledged, watching others take credit for my work while I smiled and applauded like a good soldier. This time would be different. I accepted the invite. I continued building my case. The week before the board presentation moved with strange clarity. Each day felt purposeful in a way I had not experienced in years. Every action had meaning. Every preparation brought me closer to the moment I had been building toward. Monday. Final meeting with Martin at his office. Law books lined the walls, a large desk covered in neatly organized files. He walked me through every document one last time. Signatures were obtained where needed. Legal notices were prepared. You've got leverage, Martin said, sliding the completed folder across his desk. Real leverage. The question is how you use it. Carefully, precisely. If they push back? Then we let the documents speak. No threats, no ultimatums, just facts. He nodded. Whatever happens in that room, stay calm. Don't let them provoke you. You're the reasonable one. Keep the high ground. Understood. Tuesday. I reviewed company policies on workplace conduct and recording consent. Ruth Ellman, the compliance manager, had authored most of these documents. Section 4.7, Dignity in the Workplace. Section 6.3, Harassment and Hostile Environment. Section 8.1, Recording and Distribution of Employee Images Without Consent. I printed relevant sections. I cross-referenced them with the birthday video timestamps. I added everything to my folder. In the afternoon, I walked through the plant one more time. Production line 4, running at 93% efficiency because of my modifications. The testing integration system, the automated insertion mechanism, 15 years of work running smoothly, bearing other people's names, not for much longer. Wednesday. I had lunch alone at a diner, drafting a short statement on my laptop. 3 paragraphs, factual, detailed. I revised it 16 times until the words felt right. Calm, professional, undeniable. I memorized it completely. Thursday. I visited the bank. Accounts were reorganized. My name was removed from joint holdings Frank had insisted on structuring. A new account was opened in my name alone. Another thread of control reclaimed. That evening, I double-checked the storage unit. Everything secure. I stood surrounded by boxes of evidence and felt certainty. Not hope, certainty. Friday. Frank texted the family group chat. Big presentation at Harman next week. Ethan connected with their board last month. We should celebrate after. Troy's company finally moving up? I did not respond. Frank thought this presentation was about connections he had made. He had no idea whose door was about to close. Saturday evening, Frank invited himself over to see the grandson. Ethan came along. They sat in our living room, drinking my beer, making observations about my furniture. This couch has seen better days, Ethan said. Everything here is comfortable, Frank said, which was not a compliment. At some point, Frank turned to me. Troy, I've been thinking about that birthday video. Classic moment. The way you just accepted it, sat right down like it was nothing. You seemed surprised. I was. I thought you'd push back. But no, you just folded up and sat there. Classic Troy. The video got a lot of engagement, Frank continued. People at my club found it hilarious. Glad everyone enjoyed themselves. Frank studied me. Something flickered in his expression. Uncertainty. You okay with it? No hard feelings? No hard feelings at all. Everything is exactly where it should be. He laughed, but the laugh had an edge. They left around 9. Sunday was quiet. I played with Dennis in the backyard, pushing him on the swing set. He laughed with pure joy, unaware of adult complications. I memorized his face, his voice. This was what mattered. This was what I was protecting. That night, I laid out my clothes for Monday. Gray suit, blue tie, polished shoes, the folder with all my documents organized by section, the flash drive with backup copies secured in my inside pocket. I looked at myself in the mirror. 41 years old, the man who sat at the kids' table and said thank you. Tomorrow, the room would learn who that man actually was. Monday morning, gray suit, blue tie, polished shoes. The boardroom was on the executive floor, large conference table, leather chairs, expensive artwork on the walls. A recording light blinked red near the ceiling. I arrived early. I sat at the far end of the table, near the screen. My folder was in my lap. My heartbeat was steady. By 9:30, the room was full. Brendan Hale, Stephanie Glass, executives, and Frank Hargrove, who had managed to get himself invited. Ethan sat beside him. The meeting began. Quarterly numbers, market projections, standard business. At 10:45, Brendan stood to present the recognition segment. I'd like to recognize Troy Vossil for his technical support on several projects. Troy, would you stand? I stood. Polite applause. Before we move on, I said, I'd like to provide some additional context. I opened my folder. I placed documents on the table. These are my original design sketches, dated 6 years ago, 2 years before any patent filing. This is file metadata showing my work predating Mr. Hale's involvement. This is my employment contract, specifically the clause regarding intellectual property developed using personal resources. Silence. Frank stopped smiling. My attorney has reviewed these documents. At least 3 patents were filed without proper transfer documentation. The company's legal exposure is substantial. I placed a formal notice in front of Westbrook, the board chair. Then I removed one final item, a printed screenshot, the birthday video. Me, folded into a child's chair while adults laughed. I looked at Frank. Mr. Hargrove, at my son's birthday party, you told me the kids' table suited me. You laughed, your son laughed, you recorded that moment and shared it for entertainment. Frank's face went gray. That chair did not humiliate me. That chair gave me clarity. It showed me exactly what I was to you. Furniture, to be moved and mocked. It showed me what I was to this company, a resource to be used and uncredited. I picked up my folder. Furniture cannot fight back. Resources cannot demand acknowledgement, but I can, and I have. I walked to the door. I paused. My attorney will be in touch. I left the boardroom. Behind me, Frank's voice rose, then was cut off by Westbrook. I walked through the lobby and out into the cold morning air. I smiled. I had won.